When we saw the first photographs of this new Mazda CX-5, we thought that they'd forgotten the new bit. We thought that, well, just possibly they'd left the new bit somewhere on the factory floor and then at the last minute cobbled together a few tiny changes on the existing car and rolled that out onto the motor show stage instead. Actually, that's a bit of an unfair reaction, because although initially this did look like very much the same car again, when you get up close and personal with the new CX-5, you can see that it is really quite different. It's much sharper to look at. These new lights, the new grille, the lower bonnet line. Yes, the overall shape and silhouette is the same. Of course it is. It's using the same chassis, the same engines underneath, so it's going to have the same basic hard points. But this is definitely a more honed and chiseled looking CX-5 than the previous model. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that it looks more premium, which is the buzz phrase that every mainstream car manufacturer wants to pick up these days. Now, using the same chassis and engines over again is perhaps a bit of a shame, but then again, the original CX-5 was launched only 5 years ago. At the time, that was a completely new platform, completely new lineup of engines, so perhaps Mazda can be forgiven for recycling them for this generation. There have been some improvements. This 2.2 litre 150 horsepower diesel is so much quieter than it used to be. Not just the engine, but the whole car. The Mazda engineers are really quite proud of the way they've gone through the engine, the drivetrain, the body shell, the windows, the windscreen, everything, to try and eradicate sources of noise, sources of rattles and harshness and vibration and all the things that make driving in a car noisy. And they've done a really, really good job. For a family-sized SUV, this thing is really, really quiet inside, knocking on for BMW 5 Series refinement, and that's no mean feat. It is a bit of a shame, though, that the interior essentially copies so much from the old CX-5 and from the current Mazda 6. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. It's just all a bit predictable and all a bit plain and all a bit unadorned. There have been some improvements. Quality levels are extremely good, as they always have been with Mazda, and there's a new heads-up display that, instead of using a little flip-up plastic monocle, instead projects onto the windscreen, and that's a much better effect. But this central touchscreen, a 7-inch unit, it's just not up to date anymore. It looks clunky, the graphics look old-fashioned, there's no Apple CarPlay, there's no Android Auto, the sat-nav isn't particularly good, to be honest. It's just it feels like an older system now, even though it's not that old, to be honest. But electronics, in-car entertainment electronics in particular, are moving ahead at such a pace, and Mazda has just failed to keep up there. The way it drives, though, is very, very good. I don't know if I'd quite put it at the peak of the crossover class when it comes to handling the ride, but it's not very far off. It can feel a bit jittery, a bit fidgety, particularly on the larger option wheels. You can go up to 19-inch wheels on this, but on the standard size wheels and tyres, it's much better. And it does go around corners very, very well. The steering has slightly odd weighting. It's quite light at speed and much, much heavier at low speed, which is kind of the reverse of what you expect these days. But it does feel very accurate. It does feel very good in your hands, and there's no question that the CX-5 can be coaxed through a series of corners with no shortage of speed and no shortage of entertainment indeed. It isn't brilliant, perhaps, but it's certainly very good, and as far as crossovers go, it's right at the top. Interior space is very good. There's good legroom in the back, although the fact that those rear seats are sculpted for the outer two passengers means that there's a little bit less room than you'd ideally like in the centre rear seat. Boot space, 506 litres. It's a long way from class leading, particularly if you're including the Skoda Kodiaq in that class, but it's decent enough. It's a practical car for the family. And of course, being a Mazda, it'll probably never break. Mazdas do have an excellent reputation for reliability, and we see no reason why this new CX-5 shouldn't follow suit. So overall, it's almost just like a big facelift of the old car. Even though the body shell is completely new, even though the interior is mostly new, what's underneath has remained the same, and so the story remains much the same. It's a good, solid, very Japanese, and I mean that as a compliment, family crossover that looks a lot sharper than it used to, drives about the same, is better value than it initially looks, and really one that'll probably last you and your family for quite some time to come. There's nothing wrong with that.